Coming up next, BookTV presents Afterwards, an hour-long program where we invite guest hosts to interview authors. This week, Sylvia Nasar and her latest book, Grand Pursuit, the story of economic genius. In it, the best-selling author of A Beautiful Mind takes readers through the history of economics, the study's most influential theorists, and the intellectual pursuits that she believes has helped people all over the world. She talks with U.S. Managing Editor of the Financial Times, Gillian Tett.
Sylvia, thank you for joining me to talk about your latest book, which is absolutely fascinating, covering the issue of economics and the development of economic thought over the last couple of 100 years. Can I start by asking you why you decided to write a book about economics now?
Well, I didn't decide now. I decided about 10 years ago. And but now is actually a great time because when things are going really well, people outside the economics profession tend not to be as interested in economics. And since this book is really aimed at people like I used to be, which is someone who read novels, but wanted to know what was happening in the world, I think this is a good moment. It's also, because of the financial crisis and the worst recession in the United States since the 30s. It's also a really important time to sort of put things in perspective, to take a longer-term perspective. And, of course, writing about the birth of modern economics in the middle of the great Victorian boom is a chance to do that. And I learned, first of all, I don't have a PhD in economics. I dropped out of a PhD program, but I felt like I really learned about economics in a very different way writing this book, because economics is so history bound. Okay, it's so driven. I mean, people don't set out to become an economist the way they set out to become a ballet dancer or a pianist. They may want to be a physicist or a mathematician, and something that's happening makes the action go to economic issues. And that's how people, at least the characters in this book, are drawn in. They go there because that's where the action is, and that's where they can affect what's going on.
One of the things that fascinates me is that many people think that economics is about numbers, it's about complex computer calculations and quite abstract ideas. And yet what you've tried to do in this book is really bring it to life through telling it through the stories of people. Why did you decide to do that? And it's quite an unusual tactic, isn't it?
It is, and I think because my background is in literature, so I came at everything through through novels. And when I did A Beautiful Mind, I realized that for most people who aren't techies, history and biography, i.e. people, is the way that, is what makes economics accessible. And, it may be that women wind up liking this book better than men who read pop science, okay, which is usually, the best stuff is this, these wonderful synthetic, explanations, right? And see, that's too abstract for me. So I wrote it the way I read and the way that I came to the subject myself. And I hope that it makes, I know that economics feels alien to people, and actually, as it always has, by the way, including to many of the people like Alfred Marshall or John Maynard Keynes or Beatrice Webb who took it up. And it's because it's a science, and most of us need to come to it through history and through people, because that's really what, at the end of the day, why are people interested in economics? Because they're interested in getting some control over their material circumstances.
Well, I'd like to pick you up there, because that's a very interesting theme. During the last financial crisis and the ensuing recession, many people felt very angry with economics and economists, arguing, well, they didn't see these problems coming in 2008, they weren't able to fix them, it was all the fault of the economists. But essentially what you're arguing in the book is actually a story of great hope arising out of the economics profession. Can you explain that?
Well, part of it is looking at things a little bit longer term. And it turns out that if you think about it, at the peak of the depth of the 2009 recession, okay, in the United States, per capita income, personal income, which is, or in per capita GDP, were higher than in any year of the Clinton boom or the Bush boom. Okay.
So people were richer, they doesn't feel that way richer.
And were, 30% higher than in 1990, okay? So, well, they sure didn't, because, for the very simple reason that a tenth of the workforce was out of work, which made everyone else feel I could be next.
So expectations had been cranked up for material wealth, but in some ways they were shocked by the unemployment around them.
Right. So it's a disparity between the long-term trend, which is for higher and higher and really dramatically higher levels of living standards, and these periodic crises that make everybody feel very insecure.
But in a sense, your story starts with a much more simple point, which is that before the advent of the economic profession, society couldn't actually measure the world around it and didn't think it could control it in terms of our material well-being.
Right. I mean, when Jane Austen was alive, that is, around 1800, 9/10 of humanity was destitute, okay? Destitute. In modern terms, that would be like 90% of the world population living on the equivalent of $1 a day, okay? And not only was to be human meant to be poor, but in Jane Austen's time, which of course was a period already of tremendous opulence for, a small group in society, I'm sorry, I just completely lost my
Essentially,
thread.
the issue was that you had a large number of people who were not merely poor, but also very fatalistic. There was a sense, if you like, that the world was the way it was, and no one could actually measure it or even change it.
Yes, that was the point. That not only were nine parts of humanity condemned to drudge their way through short and miserable lives, but no one thought, even the most liberal, enlightened, radical individuals thought that this was anything except the human condition, okay?
But then, of course, starting in the 19th century, people began to think, well, maybe we do not need to be quite so fatalist, but we could actually try and change it.
And 50 years later, you have Charles Dickens writing The Christmas Carol, which is an attack on that kind of fatalism.